Welcome to another episode from Mosof's APIs over IPAs podcast network. I'm Derek Gilling, your host today, and the CEO of Mosof, the API observability platform. Joining me is Charles Miller. He's the lead content strategist for APIs at Metadata Solutions, a Dassault Systems company. Charles is a multiple award-winning technical writer and leads document creation for APIs at his company. Really happy to have you here today, Charles.
Thank you, Derek.
Sure, definitely. Cool. So just getting right into things, I'm curious, what's your path to writing documentation for APIs? And as a follow-up to that, how did you transition from hanging out from Allen Ginsberg to writing award-winning technical documentation?
Well, that incident was definitely in the past. I hung out with him once, so don't want to give necessarily a wrong impression there. But no, it was fun. We're hanging out with them, but it was a long road that led me from writing the great American epic poem, if you will, to realizing that I needed to meet my family's needs and not just my own. So my first step was to find a job where I could meld my interest in writing and technology. And so I had to go back to school for technical writing and editing classes. After school, I spent a lot of time at the beginning of my technical communication career working as a consultant. Actually, for about 10 years, I was a consultant on and off. And as many people know who've done consultancy, that can be pretty stressful where you have a job and then maybe goes on for a year or maybe half a year and then it ends and then you have to look for further work. But I was lucky, I had pretty steady work. So even though it was stressful a little bit, it did give me many avenues to learn different approaches to documentation. The experience taught me how to collaborate with many different audiences and kept me up to speed on the technology. So every job I went to, I was able to accumulate new knowledge about technology. And fortunately, it was all new technology to me anyway. So, and then by the way, I didn't create the great American epic poem. I was able to have some of my poems published in 2 anthologies.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Thanks.
So, just speaking about your approach and, all the knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, what is like the number one takeaway for any of our listeners on how to create outstanding technical documentation?
Well, as everyone knows, I'm sure, it's all about time. Time is our enemy, and sometimes it's perhaps our friend. But often it's a deadline crunch. So the more you have of it, the better your text will be, is from my experience. You have time to investigate and understand the context of the information that you're presenting and that you're writing about. You have time to interview the SMEs, and you also have time to write, rewrite, and test your documentation. The main test, of course, is always to get documentation in front of the users so you can gauge its usability. And then if you can perform user surveys and usability testing to gain user input and feedback.
And then when it comes to the changes in API documentation, I know a lot has happened in terms of OpenAPI spec and Swagger and such. How does like auto generation and the new technologies play in the major advancements for documentation?
Well, having been into business for about 30 years, I can say there's been huge amounts of changes. As people will probably have heard, or maybe even some know, it's evolved from manually creating technical content in Microsoft Word, and now it's using content management systems for online consumers. We use Confluence for our major means of deployment. I've actually created documentation in HTML with the text editor and then uploaded it to the portal via file transfer protocol. That shows you how far back I go. Moving to a content management system like Confluence was major because it helped me to move towards more automated ways to generate documentation, as you said, and that this is consistent with format and brand. We can actually create a consistent message across all of our services, all of our products, because we're creating a single brand, but we're also imposing, it allows us to impose and adhere to our writing standards as well as our document programming standards. So the major advance, so that's where I've, it's kind of a little bit of history where I've been.
Mm-hmm. And then can you tell me more where it's going? What's next for API documentation?
I think that what's next is digital assistance.
Mm-hmm.
If you've, with AI and the ability to do natural language processing and natural language understanding, I think we'll begin to see systems, and I've already seen some at some of the conferences. We'll be able to see the systems that are able to take a user's question and go and come back with an answer which is pretty much canned. That is, there are some answers which the system can find because it's been set up for it. But in the far future, we're going to be talking about having AI digital assistants scanning the database, scanning the information database, and being able to come to conclusions, semantic conclusions, present answers based on that analysis. I should be able to do analysis of the information, develop conclusions based on what it's been able to identify and scan.
It
That's where I see it going.
Sounds like documentation is a lot more than just the text on a HTML site then, right? So what does documentation then encompass?
Well, to me, documentation, yeah, I mean, sometimes people think it's getting out what a system or a computer would need to know. So there's computer readable documentation, then there's human readable documentation. So I see documentation from my end anyway, even though we do some computer readable documentation, most of my work is with human readable documentation. So I have to be able to create text and information that is understandable and it's usable. Users need to be able to understand the information almost automatically. They shouldn't have to be able to, scan and parse information to figure out what it means. And then usable, they can, if they're working on a task, they should be able to take that information and finish the task that they've set up or that they have in front of them.
In terms of making it usable, is there a set of guidelines that you usually follow in terms of starting a new project?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I work with an organization in a department where we've defined writing standards.
Mm-hmm.
And writing standards are key. And they're not always, there are the industry standards. There's the API manual of style. There's the Chicago manual of style. There's the Microsoft manual of style, Apple manual of style. So those are good places to start. And anyone coming into the field should obviously be aware of those and know those, almost like the back of your hand. But then for an organization should also take those and develop its own standards. So that's what really begins the process. And then there are standards on top of that, such as the plain language principles, plain language standards, which really emphasize usability and understandability. So, we incorporate those principles, the plain language standards and principles into our own standards. So that's a good place to start. And then more usability, of course, you can extend that then to usability testing, which is some companies have the luxury of doing that. It does take time to do, but it's invaluable in being able to get user feedback. And of course, you're always opening up your documentation to comments, so users can provide comments about how useful the information is and how usable it is, and then user surveys as well. And you can take that input, and modify your information as needed.
Definitely. And one thing we've seen when it comes to documentation is, sometimes you have so many different product owners and product teams, your documentation is not consistent. You don't have the same tone. And as you're speaking to standards, what are some ways to make sure that you have a consistent tone across the entire company?
Yeah, that is, that is a challenge, and certainly standards is, again, standards, you can't go wrong in having those consistent standards. But often you'll have, for example, business writing standards. We have our technical writing standards. Sometimes people think that business writing standards are different than technical writing standards. I tend to disagree. I've taught business writing. I've also taught technical writing. I don't think they're that different, but you will find some organizations and perhaps departments that don't agree. So you have to find the baseline, which is, again, for me, it's plain language. You know, use the plain language principles. Stick to those principles where you're talking about making the information usable, informative, and communicate a sense of friendliness, a sense of transparency, that you're giving them the information, as clearly and as succinctly as you can. And I don't think that, I think in the bigger picture, that will begin to migrate to other departments as well. You have to create a consistency within the organization. So, your internal documentation should be the same, or should try to emulate what you're doing for your external audiences. And, it's a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not, but standards is definitely the beginning.
Does this mean there's like a central team that owns documentation, like a developer experience team, or should it be up to the various product owners themselves?
Well, we have a, excuse me, user experience department. So they do maintain their own standards. So we work very closely with them. So we try to correlate our standards with theirs. Um, and then we have our own department, which is the technical communication services, which is devoted strictly to providing the technical information to our users. So it's user facing documentation, and I work within that department. Ownership often revolves around, it's a partnership. You have a partnership with the developers, you have a partnership with product management, you have a partnership with testing. Each one of those should be able to provide input into the documentation. And as you say, sometimes maintaining the tone with all those voices coming in is difficult, but it's not something that you can't overcome. It's a challenge, it's an obstacle, but again, maintaining your standards, writing to the to those principles where you use active voice. For me, active voice is crucial. That will allow your tone to come across as being very direct often, and very transparent.
That's really good to know. Just leveraging the active voice over something a little more passive. Sounds like that just gets your message across a lot better. But when it comes to keeping these docs up to date, sometimes it could be an afterthought, right? I mean, how do you actually keep them up to date? You got old screenshots, API specs that are out of date. Maybe the version doesn't exist anymore. And tooling has gone a long ways in terms of stuff like Open API and Swagger, but it's still there's a lot of docs out there that are out of date. So do you have any best practices for that?
Well, excuse me, the best practices that we use is, fortunately, we've come, well, for API documentation specifically, we use Open API. So that, like you said, that really does help us to maintain the documentation, because nothing's going to change unless the engineers change, and they're the ones responsible for the Open API. We as technical writers act as technical editors, making sure that the writing, limited places that there are within the Open API spec, is consistent with our writing standards. So, I mean, it's always a matter of working with your partners, It's a matter of making sure that you have partners who are willing to create really, really good documentation that communicates for the end users.
And how do you make sure that you're speaking to the right audience, right? Sometimes you have developers that are, more novice and they're looking for just a getting started guide. You have other developers that are super experienced and they want to get right to the point and getting started. But I mean, there's so many different types of developers and flavors of developers out there. Is there any way to like structure documentation or practices on that side?
Yeah, we structured our API portal, for example, and I'm going to stick strictly to API documentation for the moment. We structured it around, like you said, being able to provide information to our various audiences. We have newbies or new users, developers, perhaps. We have really, really experienced developers. We have managers coming in to look at the documentation and say, hey, what is this? What is this API going to do? How come I should be interested in this? What am I getting out of it? Testers, testers need to be able to read it and understand it. So we provide, for example, in the getting started is something where we provide enough information for all developer levels to get started immediately. So we provide things like authentication, we provide authorization information, how to register your API app, so that developers can get up and running as quickly as possible. And then, of course, we provide code snippets. We provide samples of making API calls, and I think that OpenAPI itself, the specification, is really good about that because it provides the baseline information that almost any developer would require to make an API call, to make a request. So that has also really helped us be able to reach all of those levels of users that we have. And then, understanding your audience in terms of how they process information. Not all developers process information the same way. So we have, some developers look at it from the really big global view and want to have an entire comprehension of the system as a whole. And then they work their way down to the bottom level, and so they can piece everything together and have a clear view of what they're doing for what reason. Some developers, they just want to get started right away. In fact, most of your developers are those who want to get started right away and they have a specific task at hand, and they want to just be able to accomplish that task, get it done, and then move on to their next task. So we do provide things like workflows. We call them recipes, which show how to make a certain call within a specific instance, context. Like many developers have to perform, certain tasks within our platform. So we identify those tasks, and then we provide the steps with links to the to the Open API's documentation, which they can get the details from for making that call to accomplish a series of tasks in order to, let's say, for example, gets a username or something like that. That's very basic, but we have more complex tasks that they might perform. But each one of those steps in accomplishing that task would link to a specific type of documentation with the specifications.
Definitely, we've seen a lot more of the playbooks and the recipes. Totally think that's a great way to improve the developer experience. In fact, I think Postman's doing a lot of stuff with collections nowadays, so you can start off pretty quickly. Anything else that technical writers and developer experience experts should be doing in terms of assisting those developers get started with your platform?
Well, we would like to begin to get a playground, where users can actually make calls inside the documentation itself. And OpenAPI does provide that. So we're working towards that as well. And we want to begin implementing a forum so that developers of, either customers where internal developers can ask questions and receive almost real-time answers to, and then we can collect that information and keep it in a database so that later users can come in and question the database and receive an answer back. And as we move towards digital assistants, that type of database will be really, really useful.
And do you have some best practice on how to start a forum, especially, if you're brand new and you don't have enough of a community, how do you make sure it doesn't look like it's empty?
Well, well, since we haven't developed one, that's going to be a real question. But like everyone else, we're going to go to Stack Overflow and steal from them, maybe. Just kidding. But we have a lot of questions, and obviously our developers are very. We have a lot of really good developers who are interested in the customer point of view. So I think that they could easily populate a forum once we get it up and running with questions that users will want to know and will need to know even. And so we can begin populating it there. And then, in fact, we're working on that now. We're moving forward with this idea of recipes and workflows, identifying those standardized tasks and objectives and goals that most users would need to do and to perform to work within our system and to navigate throughout the platform.
What about the questions that developer doesn't know they need to ask? We talked about previously around forums where they have a specific question in mind or when they're getting started. But what about things like, a new feature that, they didn't even know existed, or a new use case or something? How do you think about documentation from that perspective?
That's a really interesting question. And it's something that I addressed in my presentation to the API world, which was about context. Mm-hmm. You have to understand the context. So a writer has to understand, how to provide the information in such a way that a user is going to come away from reading your documentation and be able to ask new questions and come up with their own answers. So, that's certainly not something that's easy to do, but it has to be done, at least in a more mature user documentation setting. You have to be able to understand the platform. In our case, it's a platform. You have to understand the product, and you have to understand, be able to provide that type of information that those users will most obviously and most always ask, so that they can make use of your products.
So it sounds like having context is really important to what the person is looking for. Does this mean like static documentation is on its way out, and are we moving towards more like personalized, or I guess dynamic docs, or what does that look like in the future?
Well, I think dynamic docs is definitely it, but the context is always going to be there. To me, some people might think of it as reference information. As I presented at API World, the different types of documentation that developers find include reference information, recipes, code snippets, but this reference information is overview information. And I'm not sure that digital assistants could do that at the start. That information has to be provided by someone who understands how all of this fits together and how all of it works, which is, really kind of an encapsulation about what context does and what context means. So there would have to be a human being at the beginning of writing all of this and providing it in a format that a digital assistant could somehow scan through and formulate answers to. So to answer your question, I think written documentation is going to have to at least be there until, it's just going to have to be there for even digital assistants. This is how I see it.
No, definitely. You still have to have your API reference somewhere, right? You can't just have have that all through voice or digital assistants.
Unless they develop AI systems which can begin to actually create information, create context, and that's something I don't see happening for a while. I mean, 50 years maybe. But
Well,
who knows? This understandability, the natural language understanding is pretty impressive.
it'll be interesting to see what Intercom and Drift does when it comes to documentation and helping with those little digital assistants too, right?
Hmm.
Any other tools that you recommend for our listeners besides using Open API and that type of stuff when it comes
Well,
to documentation?
we use Confluence, so I can't make a. I'm not sure whether I can make a product, uh, you know, advertisement for them, but it's a really powerful tool. It provides us the ability to guide users, to give them, to categorize information. It provides the writers templates that they can use to to begin generating documentation. So, for example, we can provide for our developers templates that they can use to begin writing their own recipes. At this point, it's me as a technical writer, um, working with the developers, working with product management testers, perhaps, to come up with the steps that are required to accomplish a specific goal. What we're looking at now is to create a template that the developers can take and begin to fill in the steps that are required. And then I, as a writer, would go back through it and make sure that it obviously follows our writing standards and follows, make sure that it fills in all the holes for what we're talking about with audiences. Well, wait a minute, maybe this level of audience needs to know this. What's the answer to that question? Or maybe another audience type needs to answer that question. Those are the types of things that we call curating information. So we, as a technical content specialist, would not be the generator of information, but we would be the curator. We would take the information and make sure that it abides by the standards that we've set up, and then also fills in everything that customers would need to know.
Totally makes sense. It sounds like that's a good way to have that standard, and have a good process, in terms of developers filling out the information, but you already have the standard of what it should look like and look and feel and everything, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's what Confluence does. I mean, it gives us a chance to brand our information and to make it consistent across all of our products.
Where do like other formats like audio, video, we see a lot of folks trying to add, different like GIFs and stuff inside the documentation. Is that important too? Or do you think that's just like a fad or?
I definitely don't think it's fad. I think it's it's the future. The future is going to be where you have digital assistants and then that's going to be melded with either GIFs or videos that provide information based on the user's needs and their context. What context are you working on? What kind of information can I provide that will answer your questions? But so video is going to be very important, and then getting it down to the GIF level, where you can go through a tiny piece of a process, would be really, really important. So we are working. We do have videos currently in our user, our end user documentation. We do have plans, however, providing videos around integration and how to integrate different products with our product using APIs. So that's going to be important. That's going to be, and I see that as something which is part of the future. Videos are very labor intensive, at least now. We have to get to the level of where you take away so much of the labor intensity and maybe put it into the hands of developers. There's some of our developers actually really adept at creating videos, as our testing team. So somehow being able to single source that information from, let's say, testing and being able to get it out to our, external audiences would be an interesting way to go. But we, we have to fit our standards. You can't just put anything out. To be professional, it has to look professional, has to be branded, etc.
Makes sense. And then my last question is, if you look at all the different companies out there, doing some great stuff with documentation, what's your favorite, and what makes it such a great company in terms of documentation?
Well, my favorite is still probably GitHub. I like GitHub. I think it's so comprehensive, and they really do get into nitty gritty. They answer the questions that you think, well, everyone should know. Everyone should know this, so we won't document it. You can't take that attitude, and that's an attitude that often we still encounter. But GitHub takes the baseline approach. What would a person who's never worked in our platform need to know to get up and running and to perform specific tasks? And so that's why I like their documentation. They've really thought through all of the ramifications of their information, and they've also thought through what their different audiences require to make use of their platform and their product.
Definitely agree. I like what GitHub's doing over with, especially with their changelog stuff. I think it's pretty cool to see how all the updates to the GitHub platform over the years.
Well, the last time I checked, I haven't checked in a while, but we based our changelog on what they do. I mean, it's very, very stripped down, very minimalistic. We changed this, we added this, we deprecated that. And then we give links, of course, to any additions and to the resources that were changed. But our customers require detailed information, and our release our release notes are pretty extensive for our end user documentation, and it even gets worse because we work in a regulated industry. We have to provide as detailed information as we can, and then our customers are very fastidious about how much information they want. They're very sophisticated. So we do provide all of that information. We have templates set up, but that's our end user information. For our API documentation, we've taken the standard of providing, what's been added, what's been changed, what's been deprecated, and then we give maybe a line or two, a sentence or two of what the change included.
Funny enough, we actually based our changelog off of GitHub's also. I mean, they do just such a good job, like you mentioned, concise, getting right to the point and not adding too much fluff to it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Charles. I appreciate, hosting you here on the MOSA podcast. Anything else that you want to add before we end?
I really thank you, Derek. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to spend time with you and to talk about something I love very much, which is documentation. And I do want to. I look forward to the product of what we've created.
Cool, definitely. And that is always super important. Trying to help developers get started and also make sure they're successful with your platform, right? So.
Always, yeah. We're customer focused, and we try to stay customer focused, and keeping everyone's feet to the fire is our goal as far as documentation specialists.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you, Derek, as well. You too. Bye-bye.